I'd been dreaming of that vacation for months. 2 weeks in Santorini, whitewashed cliffs, sapphire seas, and ouzo so strong it could strip paint off a wall. I'd saved up, booked the flights, and even splurged on a little villa with a private pool. My house in Maple Grove, a cookie-cutter suburban sprawl 30 minutes outside Raleigh, was locked up tight, the Ring camera battery charged, and my nosy neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, promised to keep an eye out. She's the type who'd report a leaf falling out of line, so I figured I was covered. The HOA here is a pain, $200 a year for rules about grass height and mailbox colors, but I've kept my head down, paid my dues, and stayed off their radar. Or so I thought. The trip was flawless. Days blurred into sunsets and I barely checked my phone. No emails, no texts, just me, a stack of paperbacks, and a sunburn that turned me the color of a boiled lobster. The Ring app pinged once, Mrs. Calloway waving at the camera with her yappy terrier, but nothing else. I landed back at RDU on a muggy Friday night, jet-lagged and hauling a suitcase stuffed with duty-free booze and tacky souvenirs. The cab dropped me off at 11 p.m. and under the streetlights my house looked off. I squinted, chalking it up to exhaustion. But as I dragged my bag up the driveway, my stomach did a slow flip. My house, my beige, boring, perfectly neutral house, was now a screaming shade of mustard yellow. I stood there, keys dangling, staring at walls that looked like they'd been dipped in a vat of Dijon. The trim, once a safe off-white, was now a glossy forest green. My azaleas were trampled, tire tracks gouged the lawn, and a faint whiff of paint thinner hung in the air. I blinked hard, thinking maybe the ouzo was still in my system. But no, this was real. Someone had painted my house, a full-on, top-to-bottom job, while I was gone. I fumbled with my phone, pulling up the Ring footage. The last clip was Mrs. Calloway's wave, time-stamped 2 days after I left. Then nothing, battery dead or worse. Panic clawed at me. I unlocked the door, half expecting to find squatters or a meth lab, but inside was untouched. Same dusty furniture, same stale air. Back outside, I circled the house, barefoot on the cool grass, my flashlight beam bouncing off the garish yellow. The paint was fresh, still tacky in spots, and a faint drip line streaked down the garage door. No note, no explanation, just a house that wasn't mine anymore. I called Mrs. Calloway, but her line went straight to voicemail. It was midnight now, the cul-de-sac silent except for crickets and the distant hum of a sprinkler. I sank onto the porch steps, head spinning. Who does this? Who paints a stranger's house and vanishes? The next morning I woke up on the couch, still in my travel clothes, the yellow walls glaring through the blinds like a bad omen. Coffee in hand, I started digging. First stop, the HOA. Maple Grove's Homeowners Association is run by a trio of retirees who treat the neighborhood like their personal fiefdom. Barb Kessler, a steely ex-lawyer with a perm. Ted, call me Teddy Hargrove, a balding car salesman type. And Linda Pham, a quiet widow who once fined me $50 for a cracked birdbath. Their office is a converted garage behind Barb's split level, plastered with bylaws and a faded "Welcome Home" banner. I marched over, still reeking of airplane, and knocked hard. Barb answered, peering over her bifocals. "Evan," she said, my name clipped like an accusation. "Back from Greece." Her tone was syrupy, but her eyes flicked past me to my house, visible across the street. I didn't waste time. "Who painted my house, Barb? 2 weeks ago it was beige. Now it's a damn eyesore. What's going on?" She pursed her lips, stepping aside to let me in. The office smelled of lavender and old paper, files stacked on a card table. Teddy lounged in a recliner, flipping through a Field and Stream, while Linda typed at a dinosaur of a desktop. "Painted?" Barb echoed, feigning surprise. "Well, that's news to us." Teddy coughed into his magazine and Linda's typing faltered. I pressed harder. "Fresh paint, new color, no permission. You're the HOA, you'd know if a crew rolled through." Barb adjusted her glasses, stalling. "We've had no complaints. Maybe you hired someone before you left. Jet lag's a beast, memory plays tricks." Her smile was tight, predatory. I wanted to shake her, but Teddy piped up, voice oily. "Yellow's bold, Evan. Makes a statement. HOA rules allow approved colors, mustard's on the list." Linda nodded, avoiding my glare. I pulled out my phone, showing them photos from before I left, beige siding timestamped. This was my house. I didn't approve squat. Barb's face didn't budge. Could be a mix-up. Contractors get addresses wrong. File a report, we'll look into it. She slid me a form, her nails clicking on the table. I snatched it, fuming. They were lying, I could smell it, thick as the paint fumes still clinging to my siding. But why? What kind of game was this? Back home, I scoured the Ring app again. The camera had died suspiciously early, 2 days into a month-long battery life. I checked the device, still mounted by the door. The lens was clean, but the back panel was loose, a tiny scratch near the screws. Someone had tampered with it. My pulse kicked up. This wasn't a prank or a mistake, it was deliberate. I grabbed my laptop, pulling up the HOA's online portal. Meeting minutes, paint approvals, violation logs, all locked behind a password I didn't have. Then I remembered Mrs. Calloway. She'd seen something she had to. I dialed again, still voicemail. By noon, I was packing the lawn, the yellow walls mocking me. A shadow moved behind Mrs. Calloway's curtains across the street. She was home, dodging me. I stormed over, banging on her door. No answer, but her terrier yapped furiously. "I know you're in there," I shouted. The barking stopped. Silence. Then slipped under the door a folded note in shaky handwriting. "Check the drainage ditch. Don't trust them." My blood ran cold. The ditch behind my lot, overgrown and forgotten. What the hell was waiting there? The note trembled in my hand as Mrs. Calloway's terrier resumed its yapping, a shrill soundtrack to the adrenaline spiking through me. "Check the drainage ditch. Don't trust them." Them who? The HOA, her. I glanced back at my house, its garish yellow glowing under the midday sun like a neon sign screaming secrets. The drainage ditch ran along the back of my property, a narrow gash of mud and weeds separating Maple Grove from the scrubby woods beyond. I'd never paid it much mind, too busy mowing the lawn to HOA specs or dodging Barb's hawk-eyed patrols. But now it felt like a clue I couldn't ignore. I grabbed a flashlight, my phone, and a pair of boots still caked with Santorini dust. The air was thick, humid, the kind of North Carolina heat that clings like a second skin. Crossing my backyard, I passed the trampled azaleas, pink petals mashed into the dirt, tire tracks fanning out like a crime scene. Whoever painted my house hadn't been subtle. The ditch itself was a mess. Knee-high grass, stagnant puddles, and the sour stink of rot. I swept the flashlight beam across it, half expecting a body or a smoking gun. Instead, something glinted, a metallic edge poking out of the mud near a rusted culvert pipe. I slogged over, boots sinking, and crouched to pull it free. It was a paint can, lid popped, mustard yellow streaking its sides. The label read Sherwin-Williams Custom Mix, HOA Gold 47. My stomach twisted. This wasn't some rogue contractor's mistake. The HOA's fingerprints were all over it. But why my house? Why this color? I turned the can over, and taped to the bottom was a soaked, crumpled receipt. The ink was smeared, but I could make out Maple Grove HOA and a date. 3 days after I'd left for Greece. $187.42 for paint and supplies. No contractor name, just a scrawled signature. Barb's looping bee was unmistakable. I sat back on my heels, mosquitoes buzzing around me, piecing it together. The HOA had painted my house themselves, or ordered it done, while I was sipping ooze 5,000 miles away. But the secrecy, the tampered Ring camera, Mrs. Calloway's cryptic note, it didn't add up. I needed more. I slogged back to the house, the can and receipt dripping in my hands, and fired up my laptop. The HOA portal was still locked, but I had another angle, the neighborhood Facebook group. Maple Grove's digital gossip pit was a cesspool of passive-aggressive posts, lost cats, yard sale ads, Barb's reminders about trash bins. I scrolled back 2 weeks. Nothing blatant, but a post from Teddy caught my eye. "Big thanks to the crew for sprucing up the block. Fresh paint makes a difference." Timestamp, a week ago. Comments were vague, "Looks great." From Linda, a heart emoji from Barb, but no specifics. No mention of my house. I kept digging, cross-referencing dates with my Ring outage. Then a private message popped up from an account I didn't recognize. Maple Resident 77. The profile pic was blank, no friends listed. The message was 3 words, "They're watching you." My cursor froze. I glanced out the window. Mrs. Calloway's curtains were still. Teddy's pickup sat in his driveway, Barb's garage office door ajar. Paranoia or not, the hairs on my neck stood up. I typed back, "Who's this? What do you know?" No reply. I screenshotted it, hands shaky, and decided to confront Mrs. Calloway again. Her note had led me to the ditch. She owed me answers. I crossed the street, paint can still in hand, and pounded on her door. The terrier went berserk, but this time she cracked it open, chain still latched. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, her perm a frizzy halo. "Evan, go home," she hissed, voice trembling. "You're stirring things up." I held up the can. This was in the ditch. HOA Gold 47, Barb signed for it. "What's going on?" She flinched, glancing past me like a hunted animal. "I warned you, that's all I can do." She started to shut the door, but I wedged my foot in. "You saw them, didn't you? Who painted my house?" Her lips quivered, then she whispered, "It wasn't just paint. Check your attic." The door slammed, lock clicking. Attic? My attic was a graveyard of Christmas lights and insulation. No one went up there. I stormed back home, pulse hammering, and yanked down the attic ladder. Dust motes swirled as I climbed, flashlight clenched between my teeth. The air was stifling, the space cramped with cobwebs and cardboard boxes. I swept the beam around, nothing at first. Then in the far corner, behind a stack of old tax files, something caught the light. A black duffel bag, unzipped, spilling wires and a glint of metal. I crawled over, heart in my throat, and pulled it open. Inside were tools, screwdrivers, a small drill, and a tangle of cables hooked to a palm-sized device with a blinking red light. A camera, not mine. Someone had wired my attic and it was live. I yanked the cables free, the light dying, and sat there, sweat dripping, mind racing. The HOA didn't just paint my house, they'd bugged it. Why? What were they after? I scrambled downstairs, duffel in tow, and checked every room. Nothing else obvious, but the unease gnawed at me. I called a locksmith, new deadbolts by tonight, but that wouldn't explain this. I needed leverage. Back on the laptop, I emailed the HOA board from the portal. "Found your paint can and a camera in my attic. Explain, or I'm calling the cops." Minutes later, my phone rang, Barb's number. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was smooth, too calm. "Evan, let's not overreact. Come by the office tomorrow 10, we'll sort this out." I replayed it twice, her tone chilling me more than the words. Sort it out? They invaded my home, watched me. I wasn't walking into their den blind. I grabbed my keys and headed for the hardware store, security cams, floodlights, anything to fight back. As I pulled out, Teddy's pickup rolled by, slow, his eyes locked on me. The game was on and I was done playing nice. The hardware store was a fortress of normalcy, fluorescent lights, the clang of carts, a cashier who didn't care about my wild-eyed stare or the duffel bag slung over my shoulder. I loaded up, 2 motion-activated floodlights, a 4-pack of security cameras, and a crowbar I didn't need but grabbed anyway. The cashier mumbled about a sale on duct tape, and I almost laughed. Duct tape wouldn't fix this. My house was a mustard-yellow target, wired by my own HOA, and Barb's voicemail still echoed in my head. "We'll sort this out." Sort what? Why me? I paid cash, paranoid about digital trails, and peeled out of the parking lot as the sun dipped low, staining Maple Grove in orange. Back home, I went full DIY commando. The floodlights bolted up by the front door and garage, their sensors twitching at every squirrel. The cameras, one on the porch, one in the backyard, 2 inside, linked to an app I downloaded, live feeds buzzing on my phone. No more dead rings, no more blind spots. I pried the attic camera's remains apart with the crowbar, its guts a mess of wires and a cracked lens. No markings, no brand, just a cheap, off-the-shelf spy toy. Amateurs, maybe, but bold ones. I stuffed it back in the duffel and hid it under the kitchen sink, evidence for whatever came next. Night fell and the cul-de-sac went quiet, my new floodlights carving stark shadows across the yellow siding. I sat on the couch, laptop open, replaying Barb's message while the HOA portal taunted me with its password wall. Then the app pinged, a backyard sensor. I bolted upright, heart jackhammering, and swiped to the feed. A figure stood at the ditch's edge, hooded, motionless. Male, maybe, broad shoulders, hands in pockets. The floodlight hadn't tripped. He was just outside its range. I zoomed in, but the face was a blur. He turned, slow, and walked into the woods, swallowed by the dark. I grabbed the crowbar and a flashlight, adrenaline overriding sense. The backyard was damp, the air heavy with pine and mud. At the ditch I found footprints, big, fresh, leading toward the trees. I followed, beam bouncing off gnarled roots and brambles until the trail vanished at a creek bed. Nothing, no hoodie, no answers, just the gurgle of water and my own ragged breathing. Back inside, I locked every door, set the crowbar by the couch, and watched the feeds until my eyes burned. No more pings, but sleep wasn't an option. Morning hit like a slap, gray, drizzly, the yellow walls duller but no less menacing. Barb's meeting was at 10 a.m., an hour away. I showered, chugged coffee, and dressed sharp jeans, a button-down, boots, aiming for control I didn't feel. The duffel came with me, camera bits rattling, plus the paint can and receipt. Evidence was my armor. I drove the 2 blocks to Barb's, parking across from her split level. Teddy's pickup was there, Linda's Prius too. A 4th car, an old black sedan, dented bumper, sat in the driveway, unfamiliar. My phone buzzed. Maple Resident 77 again. Don't go alone. Too late. Barb's garage office was a stage set. Files neat, coffee brewing, the trio in their usual spots. Teddy sprawled in the recliner, Linda at the computer, Barb behind the table like a judge. A 4th figure leaned against the wall, tall, hooded, hands in pockets. My gut clenched. The ditch guy. Barb smiled, icy. Evan, sit. Coffee. I stayed standing, dropping the duffel on the table with a thud. No thanks. Explain this. Camera from my attic. Paint can from the ditch. Your signature, Barb. The room stilled. Teddy shifted. Linda's typing stopped. The hoodie guy didn't flinch. Barb glanced at the duffel, unfazed. You've been busy. That's no camera, just junk. As for the paint, we had a project. Your house was on the list. I laughed sharp. My house without consent, that's vandalism or worse. Teddy smirked. HOA bylaws, page 17, emergency beautification. Your siding was peeling, we fixed it. Linda nodded, pulling a file. Notice sent June 10th, certified mail. She slid me a photocopy, my address, a signature I didn't recognize, forged or a lie. Bullshit, I snapped. I was in Greece. No notice, no peeling siding, check my photos. I tossed my phone on the table, pre-vacation shots glowing. Barb's eyes narrowed. Mistakes happen, we'll repaint, no charge. Too easy, she was dodging. I pointed at the hoodie guy. Who's he? Saw him by my ditch last night. He straightened, face shadowed, voice low. Contractor, checking runoff. Paint crew hit a pipe, messy job. His hand stayed pocketed, knuckles bulging. Contractor, my ass. I pressed the paint can toward Barb. HOA Gold 47, custom for my house. Why yellow, why spy on me? Teddy coughed loud, cutting me off. Spy, that's crazy talk, you're jet-lagged, Evan. Barb leaned in, voice velvet. We're a community. Sometimes we act fast, your house needed it. Drop this and we'll make it right. A threat wrapped in a promise. I grabbed my stuff. Not dropping it, cops get this next. Hoodie guy stepped forward, but Barb waved him back. Your call, she said, eyes glinting. Outside, rain streaked my windshield as I sped home, mind churning. Bylaws. Forged notices, a contractor who stalks. I called the Raleigh PD non-emergency line, filing a report, vandalism, trespassing, surveillance. The dispatcher yawned through it, promising an officer sometime today. Back home, I checked the feeds, clear, and opened the HOA bylaws PDF, buried in my email from last year. Page 17. Emergency beautification requires 30-day notice unless structural damage is imminent. No damage, no notice. They'd lied. Then my phone pinged, new footage. The front porch cam caught Teddy 20 minutes ago, slipping something under my mat. I bolted outside, rain soaking me, and lifted it. A damp envelope, no name. Inside, a photo, my house, beige, pre-vacation, but a red circle marked the attic window and scrawled on the back. You weren't supposed to find it. Find what? The camera. Something worse. Thunder rumbled as I stared at the yellow walls, now a prison closing in. Rain hammered the roof as I stood on the porch, the photo trembling in my hands. My house stared back from the paper, beige, normal, pre-grease, but that red circle around the attic window felt like a bullseye. You weren't supposed to find it. The words burned into me, Teddy's sloppy handwriting, a taunt. Find what? The camera, something bigger. My new security cams hummed, feeds clean on my phone, but the mustard yellow walls seemed to pulse under the storm. mocking my every move. I stuffed the photo in my pocket and bolted inside, locking the door, the crowbar back in my grip like a lifeline. The attic called me again. I'd torn out the camera, but that note, Teddy's warning, gnawed at me. What hadn't I seen? The ladder creaked as I climbed, flashlight beams slicing through the dusty dark. Rain drummed above, a steady roar, and the air was sour with mildew and insulation. I crawled to the corner where I'd found the duffel, shoving boxes aside. The floorboards there were loose, uneven, something I'd missed in my panic. I wedged the crowbar in, prying one up. It splintered free, revealing a cavity beneath, and my breath caught. A metal box, rusted at the edges, sat nestled in the joists, padlocked, about the size of a shoebox. I hauled it out, heart slamming. No markings, just scratches and a faint chemical smell, paint thinner maybe, or something sharper. The lock was cheap, flimsy. One swing of the crowbar snapped it open, and I lifted the lid. Inside, a stack of Polaroids, a folded map, and a thumb drive. The photos were grainy, my house, mid-paint job, mustard yellow streaking the siding. Hoodie guy was there, mask off, face blurry but familiar, those knuckles, that stance. Another shot. Mrs. Calloway at her window, terrier in her arms, eyes locked on my roof. The map was Maple Grove, my lot circled in red, lines spidering to the ditch and woods. The thumb drive was unmarked, cold in my palm. I scrambled downstairs, laptop booting as rain lashed the windows. The drive clicked in and a single folder popped up, 47, password protected. I tried HOA, gold, barb, nothing. Frustration clawed at me, but those Polaroids screamed urgency. I spread them out, studying each one. The last photo stopped me cold, me on my porch, pre-vacation, suitcase in hand. Someone had watched me leave, my skin crawled. This wasn't about paint, this was personal, planned. But why? I'd lived here 3 years, quiet, paid up, no enemies. Or so I thought. A knock rattled the door, sharp against the storm. I froze, crowbar tight in my fist, and checked the porch cam. A cop uniform, soaked, badge glinting, stood under my floodlight. Raleigh PD, finally. I cracked the door, chain on. "Evan Marshall," he asked, voice gruff. "Got a vandalism call." I let him in, relief warring with dread. Officer Diaz, mid-40s, stocky, took my statement, paint, camera, Teddy's photo, his pen scratching notes as rain dripped off his cap. I showed him the duffel, the box, the Polaroids, his brow furrowed. HOA, huh? Usually it's just fines, not this. He photographed everything, bagged the thumb drive. "I'll run this downtown. Sounds like trespassing, maybe stalking. You got enemies here?" I shook my head. "Not that I know." Diaz eyed the yellow walls. "Bold color, statement maybe." He promised a detective by morning and left, headlights fading into the downpour. Alone again, I paced, the map burning a hole in my pocket. The ditch, the woods, answers were out there. I grabbed a raincoat and flashlight, too wired to wait. The backyard was a swamp, wind whipping the floodlight beams wild. I traced the map's red lines to the ditch, boots sucking mud. The culvert pipe loomed, half submerged, and I crouched, beam piercing its mouth. Something glinted, a second paint can, identical to the first, lodged against the grate. I yanked it free, water soaking me, and flipped it. Another receipt taped tight, Maple Grove HOA, $92.18, supplies. Dated the day I left. Barb's signature again. But beneath it, in smaller print, for 47, disposal. Disposal of what? The woods were next. I followed the map's spiderweb, branches clawing my face, until I hit the creek bed where the hoodie guy's tracks had vanished. There, half buried under roots, was a tarp, blue, weathered, lumpy. I pulled it back, mud streaking my hands, and gagged. A pile of paint rollers, rags, and Jesus, a hazmat suit, yellowed and torn. Chemical fumes hit me, sharp, not just paint, something toxic. My house wasn't beautified, it was a dumping ground. I snapped photos, hands shaking, and ran back, the storm swallowing my curses. Inside, I uploaded the pics, emailing them to Diaz with a frantic note. "Found this toxic waste, help." My phone buzzed, Maple Resident 77. "They hid it there, you're close." I typed back, "Who are you? What's 47? No reply. Then the power cut, lights out, cams dead, silence except for the rain. A shadow flicked past the window, hoodie guy unmistakable. I grabbed the crowbar, heart in my throat, and dialed 911. Busy signal. The door rattled, lock jiggling. I backed into the kitchen, clutching the map, Polaroids scattered on the floor. Footsteps squelched outside, circling. My phone lit up Daya's. Stay put, on my way, too late. The back door crashed open, glass shattering, and hoodie guy loomed, rain-soaked, a crowbar of his own glinting. You should have dropped it, he growled, stepping in. I swung mine, missing, and he lunged. We grappled, slipping on wet tile, my flashlight rolling away. He was stronger, pinning me, but I need his gut, breaking free. I bolted for the front, fumbling the lock, and spilled into the yard as sirens wailed, red and blue cutting the dark. Hoodie guy cursed, vanishing toward the ditch. Daya screeched up, gun drawn, shouting. I collapsed, gasping, the map crumpled in my fist. He's gone, Woods, I choked out. The cop nodded, radio crackling. My house glowed yellow behind me, a toxic beacon. Whatever 47 was, it wasn't just paint, and I was in too deep to stop now. Rain sheeted off me as I knelt in the yard, Diaz's flashlight blinding me while his radio spat static. Sirens echoed, more cops piling in, their boots churning my lawn to muck. Hoodie guy was gone, swallowed by the woods, but his crowbar lay abandoned by the back door, proof he'd been real, not some jet-lagged hallucination. My house loomed behind me, yellow and grotesque, its secrets spilling out like the storm. Diaz hauled me up, voice clipped. Inside, now. I clutched the crumpled map, Polaroids scattered in the kitchen, and followed, the weight of 47 pressing on me. The power was still out, my new cams useless, but Diaz's team swept the place, flashlights dancing over shattered glass and muddy footprints. I handed him the tarp photos, hazmat suit, rollers, that chemical stink. Found this in the woods, disposal receipt said for 47. My house is 47 Maple Lane. His eyes narrowed, jaw tight. Toxic waste, that's felony territory. He barked orders, evidence bags, perimeter check, and turned to me. HOA's got explaining to do. You're staying put till we sort this. Sort this? I'd nearly been brained by a thug in my own kitchen. I sank onto the couch, rain drumming the roof, and replayed it all. Barb's lies, Teddy's photo, Mrs. Calloway's note, the attic box. My phone buzzed, low battery, but a reply from Maple Resident 77. 47's not just your house, it's the plan. Check the drive. The thumb drive still with Diaz, locked behind 47. I flagged him down. That drive, it's key. Can you crack it? He nodded, pocketing it. Tech on it. Sit tight. Sitting wasn't an option. Headlights flared outside, Barb's SUV, Teddy's pickup, Linda's Prius rolling up slow. Diaz met them at the door, badge out, voice steel. Maple Grove HOA, we're talking now. Barb stepped in, pristine despite the storm, her perm untouched. Teddy slouched behind, Linda clutching a tablet like a shield. Officer, Barb purred, this is a misunderstanding. Evans confused, jet lag, stress. Diaz held up the bagged crowbar. This looked confused to you. Break-in, assault, toxic waste, start talking. I stood, map in hand. 47's my address and your disposal. Paint was a cover, wasn't it? What's in my house? Barb's smile faltered, Teddy coughed, Linda stared at her shoes. Diaz cut in. We've got cameras, receipts, a suit, felony stacking up. Cooperate or it's cuffs. Barb sighed, theatrical. Fine, it's not what you think. 47 was a cleanup, old spill, pre-subdivision, chemicals in the soil. We painted to seal it, keep it quiet. Teddy nodded. EPA would have tanked property values. Did it for the community. I laughed bitter, sealed it with paint and cameras, bullshit. Diaz's radio crackled, tech unit, drives open, files uploading. He pulled his laptop and we crowded around. Folders spilled out, blueprints, emails, scans. My house's plat map marked Site 47 containment. Emails from Barb to contractor, hoodie guy, dated months back. Prep 47 for disposal, paint secondary, camera stays. A soil report buried in jargon, benzene, toluene levels above threshold. My lot wasn't just tainted, it was a hot spot. Linda broke, voice small. It's true. Old factory runoff decades ago. Developers hid it, we inherited it. Your house was the worst. Teddy growled, shut up, Lynn, but Diaz silenced him. Keep going, she swallowed. Painting was a stopgap, chemical sealant in the mix. Camera was to monitor cracks, leaks. We didn't expect you back so soon. Barb glared, but the mask was off. I pointed at the hazmat suit pic. And this, dumping gear in my woods, Teddy shrugged. Contractor's mess. He panicked. Diaz scrolled an invoice, $10,000 to Jay Reese, Hoodie Guy's real name, for 47 containment. Another email Barb to Teddy. If he finds it, deny everything, relocate if needed. Relocate what me? The waste, my head spun. You poison my house and watch me sleep, that's not community. Barb leaned in, voice low. You're fine, Evan, levels are safe-ish. We'd have moved you quietly if it got bad. Safe-ish. I wanted to scream. A cop burst in, soaked. Found him woods half-mile out, John Reese priors for hazmat violations. Hoodie Guy, cuffed and snarling, dripped in the doorway. They paid me to bury it, literally. Paint was a joke. Diaz turned to Barb. You're done, hands behind your backs. Cuffs clicked. Barb, Teddy, Linda, Reese, their protests drowned by the storm. Barb's eyes met mine, cold. You'll regret this. Values drop, we all lose. I spat back, lose. You turned my home into a landfill. The cops hauled them out, lights flashing, neighbors gawking from windows. Mrs. Calloway's curtains twitched, she'd known, warned me, stayed silent. Diaz stayed, laptop humming. Soil's hot, EPA's next. You'll need to relocate, temp housing till it's clean. Relocate. The word sank in. My house, my beige, boring sanctuary, was a toxic lie. I nodded numb as he left, promising updates. Dawn broke, rain easing, the yellow walls duller in the gray. I packed a bag, clothes, laptop, the box, every creak a reminder of their cameras, their scheme. The HOA had gambled on silence, painting over poison, betting I'd never dig. They lost. My phone pinged, Maple Resident 77. Sorry I couldn't say more, ex-board member. Left when they buried 47. I typed back, thanks, who's this? A pause then, Calloway's son. She's scared but safe. The terrier lady's kid, my shadow ally. I stepped outside, air sharp with wet grass and betrayal. A hazmat van rolled up, yellow suits spilling out, tape unspooling around my lot. Site 47. The neighborhood would crater, values, trust, all of it, but I'd expose them. Barb's crew faced jail, Reese too, me. I'd crash at a motel, fight the developers next, claw back what I could. The yellow house stood quiet, a garish tombstone to their greed. I snapped a final photo, proof, a warning, and walked away. The sun rising on a maple grove that'd never be the same.